also, like, there's a reason he's a meme. It's because you're watching that intro cutscene. And who are you gonna remember? Fia, the deathbed companion, or the Dung Eater? Which isn't to say that Fia isn't memorable, no shade on Fia, but the Dung Eater stands out. And then as you progress through the game and experience his questline, he really seems, he's an odd duck. And I think Elden Ring presents, it plays in a sandbox of theology and structural theology, in the sense of it goes beyond just saying, like, what is the nature of a god and how can that be interpreted or misappropriated, and steps into the realm of interpretation about how do common people interpret God and the divine and their place in relation to these things that are much grander than them. So it's a really interesting place that FromSoft kind of takes their narrative, and right off the bat, there will be spoilers for Elden Ring in this video. Spoiler alert. I'm going to talk about the ending and significant plot points in the game. But what I really want to talk about is an argument for the Dung Eater. I've seen a lot of people in, like, YouTube comments and what have you talk about how evil he is, and how he's one of the most evil characters in FromSoft lore. This isn't so much going to be a defense of the Dung Eater as a person, but a defense of what the Dung Eater is doing, and a defense of the world that he envisions, which isn't necessarily a world that I would choose if it were in my hands, but I think there's an argument to be made for it. So I want to lay that out. The other thing I want to preface all this with is that FromSoft lore is notoriously difficult to decipher. You have to pore through item descriptions and, remember character dialogue and unreliable narrators or characters and such. So there's a lot of room for interpretation, especially with Elden Ring being so new. And additionally, I haven't exactly gone into a deep dive with the community knowledge base. I haven't watched, like, big lore videos, which even then I know that most of those are, they really are just theories, especially at this point. But I'm saying all that because this is going to be my interpretation of the lore in the game that I have come up with from playing the game myself and from discussing it with my brothers. I have two brothers who were playing the game at the same time as I were, so we were theory swapping a lot, so they helped to refine some of my ideas as I heard what they were experiencing and what their thoughts were. And then, of course, I have seen some stuff online. It can become hard to disentangle things a bit, but I don't want you to think that I am, like, collating all the best theories from Reddit and YouTube and whatever, because I really have experienced very little of what the community is thinking about certain things. But without any further ado, I'm going to pass on the cheap pun there. Let's talk about the Dung Eater. So, our first exposure to the Dung Eater is the opening cutscene, where the narrator I'm just getting hyped thinking about it. The voiceover is incredible. Oh, and by the way, I have a big mug of blood orange tea here. Oh, that's too hot. It's just shy of boiling at this point, so I'll let that cool for a couple minutes. So, opening cutscene. The narrator starts rattling off some noteworthy tarnished. Talks about Horalu. Talks about the ever-brilliant gold mask. Sir Gideon Ofnir, the all-knowing. Thea, the deathbed companion. And he also mentions the loathsome Dung Eater. And that is accompanied with an image of the Dung Eater hanging from a noose, suggesting a public execution, perhaps for being such a loathsome eater of dung. And we don't see him for a while in the game after that, until he shows up to the round table hold. And even then, he doesn't really want to have much to do with us until we find an item that makes us interesting to him. But the basic gist of the Dung Eater that you pick up pretty quickly from talking to him and talking about him with other characters is that he defiles corpses and how to say it tactfully, plants a curse in them, which curses them to be omens. Now, what are omens? Well, omens are seen at various points throughout the game. They are large, humanoid creatures that have horns emerging from their body. For instance, Margit, the Fell Omen, is an early boss that you can meet. He has horns emerging from his head. He is an omen. He has a twin named Moog, or Mogwin. And Margit is also Morgoth, of course. So, Margit is Morgoth. I forget what I said. All these names, man, the Elden Ring names are insane. So many of the same letter. So you have Margit, who is Morgoth, and you have Moog, who is Mogwin. And both of them are omens. You also find many omens down in the sewers beneath Lanedale, the capital. And as you look at item descriptions, you can learn a little bit of lore about these guys. When a child is born with omen horns, the horns, if the child is a commoner, the horns are cut off, which often results in the death of the child. And if the child is a noble, then the horns are not cut off, and the child is put in the subterranean shunning grounds beneath Lanedale, basically locked away. And the omens, they have these horns emerging from them, which visually is reminiscent of the Crucible of primordial life, which is the ancient primordial form of the Erd tree, right? So you've got the big Erd tree, the big glowing tree, and in ancient times, that used to be something called the Crucible, and in the Crucible, all life was it literally was, but the item descriptions, the way they talk about it, life was kind of all mixed up, mixed together in a big soup. And today, in the modern Elden Ring, in Elden Ring the game, this is long after the Crucible has evolved into the Erd Tree, however that happened. Possibly by the intervention of the Greater Will. There are the Misbegotten, who are, I think the place most people probably meet them first is on the Weeping Peninsula, down at Castle Morn. They are the humanoid creatures with tails. Sometimes they have wings. They've got a lot of animal features. And those are called Misbegotten. And there are the Omens. Well, actually, so the Omens have like horns coming off them, which is basically what ties those two together is that they are reminiscent of the Crucible, where these things are all these body parts and stuff are mixed up. And I don't necessarily mean that literally, because we don't know what the Crucible looked like, but when you look at the Crucible knights, they have these special incantations, these special spells that allow them to summon animal forms. So they can grow wings, they can grow a tail, they can, there's that one that, it gets like a big frog neck, sprays gas or fire or something. But anyway, they draw on the Crucible and summon these animal forms. So, when you look at the Misbegotten, or the Omens, there's a distinct connection there with the Crucible Knight spells that draw on the Crucible, and the Misbegotten and the Omens, who have these animal features. So, my point is that there is there's an item, I didn't want to make this a whole hours of prep of looking through the item descriptions and pulling up the ones that would be relevant. So pardon me for that, but there's one that I can recall that talks about civilization kind of seeing those primordial forms as dirty. Kind of uncouth, maybe, at best, and sinful or shameful at worst. Which is, I think, why you see that the Misbegotten are used as servants. And that's why they rebel at Castle Morn. They were the servants there. And why you see the Omens either killed or locked away. And if you are an Omen, you cannot return to the Erd Tree when you die. Most people are reincarnated to the Erd Tree, but the Omens are not. So that's kind of the baseline of some of those ancillary facts, which are going to become relevant as we talk about the Dung Eater. Because the Dung Eater's curse turns somebody into an Omen. And I think it's when they're reincarnated. I'm a little fuzzy on the details of how this works. I think you get reincarnated basically no matter what. It's just a matter of if you are reincarnated through the Erd Tree or not. Because the Dung Eater plants his curse into people, and they seem to be dead. They're strapped to chairs and look very dead to me. So I think the curse is you find the curse on those corpses, and it's probably connected to their soul, so when their soul is reincarnated in a new body, that body is an omen. See if I can take a sip of my tea now, or if it's gonna burn my mouth off. Okay, it's drinkable. So, you have the kind of status quo before the Dung Eater comes in, right? Which is essentially a biological caste system, and a very brutal one at that, which says if you are born an Omen, you are going to be killed. You are going to be physically disfigured and killed, or you are going to be locked away without help or sympathy for your entire life. And the Omen killers in the game, they are these enemies that have big horned helmets and big axes that they carry around. Their whole deal is that they, you don't need to read too much into it. Omen killers, what do you think they do? So you have basically an order of people that have made it their purpose to destroy you. So it's not good to be born an Omen in the world of Elden Ring. But is there a defensible moral position for this? It seems pretty obvious that there's not. Because look at Morgott. A lot of the enemies in Elden Ring are just mindless zombies from the perspective of, can you have a conversation with these people? Can you reason with them? Most people are just going to attack you on sight. So it's hard to read into that how, sentient they are or not. The shattering caused all this, madness to occur, right? But even if we say that, the omens that you meet in the Shunning Grounds, and there's one that you meet in Stormville. But, even now I'm getting over my skis, because you meet an omen in Stormville that's had their horns cut off, and they're clearly a valued member of the team, right? They're just hanging out in the courtyard with their dogs. They seem like they're the Houndmaster or something. They're hanging out in the courtyard with all those exile knights or whatever, the guys in the red hoods. So they're not fighting the Omen, they're not killing the Omen is getting along fine with them. Similarly, Morgott is defending the Erdtree. Even though you read his description of one of his items, I think, talks about how he was never loved by the Erdtree. That he was despised, but he nonetheless loved the Erdtree and dedicated himself to protecting it. And so when the shattering went down, everybody else, all the other demigods, scattered, fighting over who would be the new Elden Lord, or the new god, really, who would replace Marika. And Morgott is the only one who basically stayed loyal. It's that kind of archetype of the long-suffering defender, but in this case, the thing that he was defending hated him, And so, you get that great cutscene when you fight Morgott, where he walks down and he looks at all the thrones, and he lists all the demigods' names. He says, traitors all, because all of these guys who, kind of by rights should have had a lot more loyalty to the Erdtree, the Golden Order, they all tear themselves apart out of greed and ambition. And Morgott's the only one left, doing his damn job. So, clearly, being an Omen does not mean anything about who you are as a person. Morgott is proof of that you can be a totally loyal, reasonable individual while still being an omen. And that is important because when you look at the Dung Eater, he is killing people. He is terrifying people. He is causing pain. But the end goal of his is to make everybody omens. And that in itself is not... That in itself does not have a moral weight to it beyond the accompanying weight of any sort of change. I guess what I'm trying to say is that, like, the Dung Eater turning somebody into an omen and creating lineages where everybody who comes from that omen is themselves an omen. Because that's what he talks about. He talks about he's going to lay his curse on somebody, and then all of their children and their children's children will be omens, thousands and thousands of them, until eventually the lands between are all filled up with omens. That's basically what his ending suggests when you get his mending rune and become Elden Lord. You bring about his sort of cursed, his omen-cursed world. And I think at first blush, it's easy to think that that is a, quote-unquote bad ending. But let me try to think of an analogy for this. Okay, this is probably going to be an unsatisfying analogy. I'll try to think of another one as I go through, but in the olden days, being left-handed was a bad thing. It was seen as a sign of moral failing or ill intention, kind of a bad person if they were left-handed. The word sinister, I believe the root of that word, like sinistrum maybe, I don't recall exactly, it just means left-handed. But because of the associations with being left-handed, we got the word sinister, which means, bad, ominous. So, in the olden days, you had people, you probably got people who were burned as witches for being left-handed, right? And even as recently as like the 1900s, you would have school children being forced to write with their right hands instead of their left hands. So imagine this world where, and we can all recognize that being left-handed is not a bad thing. None of us are going to argue that being left-handed is a bad thing. Unless you're trying to use right-handed scissors. So, let's say that you live in, 1650. And you see, and you're left-handed. You see all these left-handed people around you getting burned at the stake, getting beaten until they learn to use their right hands for everything, so they become right-handed. You see this horrible world that you're living in, and then you discover that you have the power to turn other people left-handed. You have the power to turn right-handed people into left-handed people. What are you going to do with that power? Are you going to use it or not? Because if you use it enough and turn everybody in the world left-handed, then there will be no cause to torment or discriminate against left-handed people. Everybody is equalized in that field. So if you get everybody to become left-handed, you have ended all that suffering that came from the disparity there, the comparison there. there's a certain group of people who are being tormented for no good reason. And the Dung Eater's response to that is to say, okay, I'm going to make everybody like that tormented, I'm going to make them akin to that tormented group. And once that is done, there will be no cause to torment that group anymore because everybody will be that way. Does that make sense? So, this is not to say that what the Dung Eater does. First off, this is not to say that the Dung Eater is not evil. Because you have to separate who a person is and what they do. We're all aware that an evil person can do good things. We're all aware that a good person can do evil things. So the Dung Eater could be a sick, sadistic, cruel freak of nature. And it kind of seems like he is. But he can also he can be doing the right thing, and kind of laterally to that point, if the Dung Eater is hurting people to bring about this new world, well, now you're just in the conversation of like, how much suffering can you inflict in the course of a good aim? When you go to the gym and work out until your muscles burn, you wake up sore the next day. That is pain that you are experiencing. But it is worth it for how you are strengthening your body. If you are teaching a child how to walk, and they walk a few steps and they fall and they skin their knee, the response isn't to say, oh, how terrible of you to let the child walk. You should carry them everywhere. Now, of course, I'm not comparing what the Dung Eater does to people to falling and scraping your knee. But in the pursuit of his goal, in the pursuit of his equal world, he is hurting people, and these people are going to be reborn, right? So this is why I'm saying, this is why I said early on that I wouldn't necessarily do what the Dung Eater does, right? But also, like, the world of Elden Ring is really effed up, and whatever course of action you choose, there's going to be consequences. So, you could think about it like, if, okay, our society does not cater to somebody who has a disability that sets them apart from the norm. If somebody is blind, they have to use tools that allow them to navigate a world that is set up for people with sight. If you turned everybody in the world blind, then the world would adapt to make the world easy to navigate for blind people. Societies would structure themselves in a way that was built on the understanding that everybody is blind, that sight is not a sense that we have. And then nobody would be put in a more difficult position because they are blind. It would be the normal state of things. So I think that's what the Dung Eater is about. And, you can criticize him for his methods and for the pain that he inflicts. But he sees a way out, right? He sees what he is doing is a path that will bring an end to the suffering being inflicted on the Omen. thorns, their bodies are disfigured, mutilated. The ones who aren't are stuffed in a sewer to live the rest of their lives in an underground hellscape, completely ignored by their noble parents who just cast them aside. So, if you are somebody in that position, the idea of hurting another person in order to end that suffering can seem pretty reasonable. Anyway, I think that's all I have to say on the Dung Eater. Just kind of thinking if there's anything else interesting to talk about. I feel like I've basically laid out his reasoning as I see it, you know. And so you might have listened to all this and say, okay, yeah, but like, I still don't want to do that. That's still a bad ending in my mind. And that's fine. But I think it's one of those things where the Dung Eater is not... He is presented as a villain because the game... And when I say presented as a villain, I mean everything he says is very villainous. Other people talk about him as a villain, right? And that's because, you know, to go back to the blindness example, if you were going around blinding everybody, you would be considered a villain by the world, you know? And in the world of Elden Ring, to curse people with the fell curse is to be a villain from the perspective of the ruling order, of the Golden Order. Because you are restructuring the world, and this gets back to what I said early on about how Elden Ring plays in the space of theology and theological structures, right? So, to get into that, you have, let's take a real world religion, you have Christianity, you have the idea of Christianity, right? That is a very high level. Nobody is just a Christian. They belong to a particular sect. They are Presbyterian. They are Catholic. They are Mormon. They are Jehovah's Witness. They are whatever sect. And that is the structure that you put on the Christianity, right? So, in Elden Ring, the game presents endings that reflect different ways of confronting how the particular structure that you have used for your... And I go to religion because that's the closest analogy that we have in our world, I think. Obviously, this is very different in Elden Ring because, I mean, it's just a very different thing. There's like outer gods who are fighting amongst each other for power. You know, in a sense, it's a lot more like an ancient theology of pantheism, but not pantheism. That's not the right word. Like a pantheon of multiple, like a Greek or Roman sort of thing where you have a bunch of different gods jockeying for power and influence and whatnot. Certainly not a one-to-one comparison. Anyway, so the point is that I see the structure of Elden Ring's plot as basically the Tarnished is kind of like Martin Luther, right? Martin Luther looked at the church and said, the church is doing really messed up things. The Pope is doing really messed up things. Unjustifiable things that do not reflect truth and righteousness. And so he had to decide how he was going to confront that, and what he did was he went and he nailed his theses onto the church door and started a reformation. And in Elden Ring, it's like it's a very silly comparison, isn't it, right? But it's like you're playing Martin Luther at that point where he is confronting the organization that I am a part of that offers truth to me is flawed, is fundamentally flawed, and what am I going to do about that? And what I like about Elden Ring is that there is no method of preserving what exists. Even if you go the kind of fundamentalist route, like, in the analogy of Martin Luther, were to double down on the Catholic Church, you can't protect what is already there. You have to burn down the Erd Tree. There's no way to avoid that. There's no getting around that. The Erd Tree must burn. You have to bring a lot more chaos into the world before you can get to the end of the game. And I really like that because the first time I beat the campaign, or specifically when I got to the point where you light the Erd Tree on fire, I said to myself, wow, I'm on the bad ending path. And I mean, I was, because I had adopted the Frenzied Flame, kind of accidentally. I didn't really realize what I was doing. So I thought to myself, man, I just set the Erd Tree on fire. I'm in the bad ending. There must be a different way of doing things that saves the Erd Tree. But there isn't. You have to tear apart the corrupted foundation and choose what comes in its place, because it's sort of like if you're walking across a rotten floor. The floor is going to shatter. It is rotten, and the weight being put on it is going to cause it to collapse. There is no getting around that. You have to choose what goes in after it's gone. So Elden Ring presents all these different options for what comes after that I think there can be pretty interesting conversations to be had about that. I've been using theology as my baseline, just because that's what kind of clicked in my mind for what I feel like it's talking about. I mean, you're literally talking about gods and Queen America, this eternal godly figure, blah blah blah. So that's the easiest tie-in for me, but I'm sure you can have other analogies about it. So for me, the Dung Eater ending is saying what came before, the structure that was here before, was causing suffering and pain unjustifiably. There was no reason for this cruelty to be there. And so I'm going to build something next that brings everybody to that equal footing, such that that same suffering can no longer be doled out in the way that it was before. And that's what's up with the Dung Eater. So, with the caveat that all of this is just my kind of interpretation of the game. And I'm sure there are some things that could be argued with, but I think generally, I feel pretty confident that I'm on kind of the right track. But really, who knows? I'd be happy to hear that I'm wrong and hear an alternate explanation. I think having these kinds of conversations is what's so fun about the plots and narratives of FromSoft games. I've seen people criticizing the way that FromSoft tells their story by saying, oh, there's no plot in Dark Souls. There's no plot in Elden Ring. And I can recognize that there are upsides and downsides to the way that FromSoft tells their stories, and there's definitely downsides, but I think what's such a cool upside about it is this. It creates a very fertile ground for interpretation and discussion. And that's a really cool experience to have, so I've always enjoyed how FromSoft tells their stories in that way. if I don't make the videos now, my memory of the specifics will fade over time. Be less likely to make the videos later, so I might make another video covering the other endings. Probably not a video for each ending or character, you know. I'm in my New Game Plus right now, and I've been doing Gold Mask's quest line and just finished it. It's a great quest line. I didn't do it my first time around. And it has totally reframed how I thought about things in the game. It's informed a lot of what I've talked about in this conversation about tying it into theology. I think a lot of the reason that I'm tying it into theology as a major analogy is because of Gold Mask's quest line. It has such a heavy religious angle to it. And it's a really good quest line. I love seeing how Corin develops over the course of it. Gold Mask is it doesn't say much, but cool character nonetheless. So, maybe I'll come back for another lore ramble in that way. But, thank you for watching and listening. I hope that you have fallen asleep. If that was why you were here, to get a nice, relaxing ramble about the loathsome Dung Eater as you drifted off to dreamland. Good tea. And I'll see you next time.